Welcome to the I-9 Intelligence YouTube channel, where we answer common questions from HR professionals, legal experts, CEOs, and everybody and anything in between. One of the number one questions that we get is, can the I-9 be completed prior to the start date? We see this question asked all of the time, and so we wanted to share HR compliance best practices with y'all. And I think it's important to remember why be compliant with the I-9. A lot of folks don't know this. They don't understand the risk, but penalties can be over $28,000 per violation. So you want to be prepared as well for potential ICE audits. If you get a notice from the federal government, you have 72 hours to respond. If you're a larger company, if you're hiring dozens, hundreds, or thousands of employees, that 72-hour window still applies. Additionally, you want to identify errors before they become violations, and that goes with demonstrating good faith compliance. When you go through an audit, you need to show that you're actually trying to be compliant with the worker authorization protocol in the I-9 form. And ultimately, this reduces your company's exposure. I can't tell you how often I talk to CEOs and HR directors, VPs of HR, who don't understand how much exposure there is if you do go under an audit. If you have a number of employees, you are facing at minimum a couple of $1,000s per violation, and at maximum over $28,000 a violation. And yes, we are seeing criminal cases against business owners. First, what is the Form I-9? What's the structure of it? This is important to know. To baseline, there's 3 sections. The first section, it needs to be completed by the employee's first day. That's really important. That's basic. The employee is going to complete it. They're going to sign it. They're going to show the employer is going to verify the completion. That is the employer's responsibility. With the Form I-9, the employer is always the one who is ultimately responsible. The employee shares their documentation and the employer verifies it. Section 2 is done by the employer. In section 1, or as part of the I-9 process, the employee is going to provide those identification documents, and the employer is going to verify the authenticity. This needs to be completed pretty quick. Section 3, so modification. This is one, I am amazed how often HR professionals do not even know what Section 3 is. This is, if you have a workforce where you have employees, you need, and even if they're longtime US citizens, if their passport expires, you need to file Section 3 on that I-9. So this applies to everyone. Section 3 needs to happen. If you're rehiring someone as well, it's important. So what are some common compliance challenges? Really, you need to gather all of your records. You need to know what is the status of all of your records for all of your Section 3s. You need to kind of have that in order. And with the I-9, strict deadlines, actually, they really matter. So Section 1 has to be done on the first day. Section 2 needs to be done within 3 business days. Here's a little known tip. If your business operates on weekends, Saturdays and Sundays, those are considered business days. That's a little extra tip for you. Enforcement has been increasing over the last decade. And I think there's a couple of, it's either external enforcement where we see audits from the federal government. States are increasingly getting involved now, especially with E-Verify laws and the different states that require it. And then also internal enforcement. So I think business leaders, part of their job is to follow the news and the current climate, politically, economically, whatever it is. So a lot of CEOs are asking their HR teams to do audits, bring in outside parties to do audits, look through I-9s and get a sense of what is their compliance rating. It's also important if your company is looking to go public, as in an IPO or maybe a merger acquisition from a private equity fund, you need to be doing audits before you acquire a business so that you understand your compliance risk. That's a foundational part of the checklist for great PE firms. And you really want to have a proactive approach here. With increasing enforcement, you need to show a proactive approach. So can it be completed before the start date? I just am blown away how many people don't know this. We get thousands of impressions a day on our website looking at this specific question. It's incredible how often business leaders don't know the answer to this. I talk to CEOs all the time, HR directors, VPs of people. They don't know the answer to this. It's crazy to me. It's a huge component because it's a foundational component to I-9 compliance. And the fines, like I talked about before, the fines, the compliance risk, it can be severe. If you have over 1,000 employees, multiply that by $28,000. That's your maximum fine risk. So it's not a small amount of money. And when the timing is done wrong, I think it's important to understand the risks. So if if you're not doing this correctly, you're not documenting changes to start date. And start date is one of the key parts of the I-9 form. If there are changes in the employee's name, like employee gets married, changes their name, right? If there's a work authorization change, so if they're on a TPS from Venezuela, or if their supporting documents expiring, then again, that is part of the I-9 process. You need to do a Section 3. So that's part of the risk here around the I-9. If the employee accepts a different job, even within your company, there can be issues there. Time gaps. If there's big gaps between when the I-9 is filled out and the legal requirement around the I-9, and if you have problems with that whole standing operating process, your onboarding process of how you do employees, then you're looking at a greater chance of errors. So this is why going digital helps. If you have a digital I-9 system, you're going to have information checklists for employers, for employees. It's just very easy. You're going to minimize all those common mistakes that happen. Even if you input the date wrong on the form I-9, like if you do month 006 versus just 6, that's a super common mistake that we see that a digital I-9 system will fix and just completely automate. You're going to get those deadline reminders and expiration alerts. So especially for Section 3, if you have a big company, you've got lots of employees, you need to know when folks supporting documents are expiring, or if they're using document receipts. This is allowable under USCIS rules. So if someone has a receipt of a new passport, that receipt can qualify as a supporting document, but it expires much quickly. And so you want to be tracking that for your Section 3s. And then you really, you're going to have status reporting across, all of your Section 3s that need to be done, time to complete Form I-9, how many I-9s are out there, e-verify cases, all those key metrics and components that make up a super compliant onboarding process. And I think it's important to call out, we see folks who come to us, they have a 0 to 10% compliance pass rate on their Form I-9s, and we can get them up to 100% with our digital I-9 solution. So finally, the answer you've been waiting for, I've been keeping a tease. Can the I-9 be completed before the start date? Yes, it can. It can be done before the start date of the employee, but there are some important conditions. The offer must not only be out, the job offer has to be extended, but also accepted by the employee. So in your HRIS, in your onboarding process, your workflows, your standing operating procedures for onboarding, if the offer is out but not accepted, you cannot do the I-9 yet. So really important note there. Obviously, all standard guidelines and deadlines are going to apply in this process. And of course, I think with the Form I-9 process, timing and compliance, they go hand in hand. So when you're thinking and architecting your process for onboarding employees, you need to think about how the I-9 fits into that, and you need to create those gates. So you cannot send an employee or an applicant an I-9 if they have not officially accepted the offer. So if you don't have an offer acceptance, do not send the I-9. That's kind of the baseline. So some employer best practices, when you're completing those I-9 forms, if you're using paper, good luck. If you have more than 10 or 20 employees, good luck, but use some checklists. If you're operating in multiple locations, again, if you're doing paper, you need to really think how you're approaching this because your compliance risk is severe. That applies for any company. It's not just agriculture or construction or areas that maybe you're already thinking about. Tech companies, consultancies, staffing agencies, anything retail, anything where there's employees. Frankly, it doesn't matter if you have a completely remote team, if you're a super remote tech enabled business and you're pushing software, hey, guess what? Your compliance is actually not the lowest because you've got remote employees. There's so many ways that you can mess this up. And like I said before, enforcement has been ramping up. So you want to really minimize the time between the completion of the I-9 and the start date. That's kind of a big one. So ideally, if someone accepts their offer and then they fill out and complete Section 1 of the I-9, that should be as close to their actual start date as possible. So even if they have accepted the offer, you may want to delay the I-9 process until their first day. Like you may have them do that, the very first thing they do when they're logging in for the day on their first day of work. So that's something to think about. You'll want to also just really e-verify is required in a lot of states now. It's also required for any federal contractors. That's a good tip. And if you are a subcontractor for a federal contractor, like say Verizon, obviously they do a lot of big federal contracts, or Boeing, whatever it is, big federal contractors. If you are a subcontractor of them, you are very likely still need to be in compliance with E-Verify rules and I-9 compliance. Those go hand in hand. So digital solutions, obviously, to simplify this for everyone, they eliminate your errors to get you to a 100% I-9 compliance rating. And they also show your audit trail. That's a whole other discussion. So some key takeaways for you, final thoughts. Yes, the I-9 can be completed before the start date, but with those specific conditions that I just went over, timing is super important. You need to be aware of managing through changes compliantly. This is part of your job as a business leader, as counsel, as HR management. You need to stay proactive. That's going to benefit you. But you need to have an I-9 policy. It's amazing. Companies with thousands of employees don't have I-9 policies. This is in tandem with your onboarding policies and your procedures. If you get an audit and you do not have an I-9 policy, that is a huge red flag, and you're almost certainly going to be up for fines. So obviously, again, digital solutions make this simple for your team and compliant. I think you really want to be implementing preventative measures across your process. So train your HR staff on proper I-9 procedures, create detailed I-9 completion checklists that can be built into your HRIS workflow, whatever you're doing. Establish clear retention and purging procedures. Again, this is another one. I'm just blown away. People have no idea about this. I didn't know about this until I started to get into more of the HR world. But if you are not purging correctly your I-9s, that creates risk for you. You need to be scheduling in regular internal audits of your I-9 and onboarding process. And you really should consider an electronic I-9 management system that, it's going to automate errors automatically. It's going to give you those expiration alerts, specific cases that you need to run down. It's going to give you audit ready reporting. That's really important. And I recommend, I think, you can always review the USCIS handbook. It is extensive. We know it obviously very well, but you should definitely take a look at that. And I think this is an important one. You may want to move to an I-9 digital solution, even if you have an HRIS solution in place. One thing I've noticed with businesses is they tend to change their HRIS strategy fairly frequently. And by frequently, I mean every couple of years, they might migrate their HRIS solution. Or they're on multiple HRIS solutions and they're trying to get down to one. Or if they're in the mergers and acquisition space, acquiring companies, and they need to merge everyone over to the HRIS of record. So what you may want to consider, and we have actually almost all of our clients at I-9 Intelligence have an HRIS, but they also use us specifically for their I-9 process. And because of our API integration capabilities, our ability to work across different cloud and server solutions, we're able to integrate so that if you do need to move your HRIS, you can still keep all of your records compliantly on the I-9 Intelligence solution. I'd also recommend consulting with legal experts around immigration and employment law, especially. It's amazing. Again, I talk to lawyers all the time, general counsel, even employment attorneys who don't know this. A lot of the specifics around the USCIS handbook, the rules for the Form I-9, they haven't gone through as many audits as we have supporting their customers through that process. And then, of course, you can always go through our resource center on i9intelligence.com. This is very popular. Love to share that with you as well. And again, I'll just kind of go over again some of those common violations and penalties that, you run risk of. Technical violations. Yeah, have, we have clients with tens of thousands of employees. You may not see that $28,000 per violation, but you might see somewhere in the range of 250 to 2,500. In fact, I think this actually just went up. They've tied it to inflation ratings now, so these fines go up every year. But you're still looking at potentially a couple $1,000s per employee Form I-9 done wrong. So, and if you're doing a paper solution or if you're distributed across a bunch of different HRIS platforms, it's amazing how often we do audits for folks who are using a big big name HRIS platforms that have no audit trail. They don't even. It's just, I could go on and on about that, but it's amazing. You want a specialized I-9 solution that, really gets the compliance right. That's going to eliminate all of this fine risk. And then again, if the federal government sees or they believe that you have a pattern of hiring unauthorized workers, those violations can go up to over 28,000 each. So if you think about, you have a workforce of say 1,000 workers and say 10% of them are unauthorized workers, those I meant, 100 of those potentially. If the federal government thinks that you're intentionally doing this, that's almost that's just a huge fine right there. So, and we see that all the time. You read about in the news, the raids are increasing. So just, it's important for people to know. And then if you have multiple violations, like we see honestly, we see 8-figure penalties too. Especially for larger companies, it can get in the tens of millions of dollars. And then again, this is something I get asked about by CEOs. Is there a criminal penalty here? Like, could you go to prison, for instance, for doing this wrong? The answer is yes, you can. The government, in limited cases, it's not frequent, but if you are knowingly violating this, or the government thinks that you're knowingly violating this, which again, we know those are two different things, there are instances that we've seen. We saw one about a month ago in Houston, Texas, where the government is prosecuting a criminal investigation against a business owner. So I think if you want to protect your business, you need to get ready for it, conduct regular self audits. You need to fix errors properly. That's a big one. You need to implement preventative measures. You need to consider an automated solution like ours. And again, you can always visit our website, book a demo to talk to a compliance expert, or give us a call anytime. And then, of course, learn more. We have this resource center. It's very popular. We get a lot of traffic there. Check it out. Learn more about this process. Again, I'm Jed, CEO of I-9 Intelligence. Love speaking with you today, and look out for more content. Thanks. Bye.